Up next on the TWIP network, Frederick Van Johnson and I tackle the all-new Sony RX100 Mark IV on All About the Gear. The gear reviewed on today's show was supplied by BorrowLenses.com. Rent, ship, shoot, and return. It's just that easy. For 10% off your next rental, use discount code TWIPROCKS, TWIPROCKS.
Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of All About the Gear. I am your substitute host, Frederick Van Johnson, sitting in with my good friend, Mr. Doug K. Today we're going to be talking about the Sony RX100 Mark IV. Now, Doug and I went to lunch a while back at our normal haunt over in Berkeley at T-Rex. Doug pulled this camera out. We were playing around with it at the table. And he did some, I don't know, some magic tricks with this thing that no other camera that I know of can do. We're going to talk about that, and as well as a bunch of other features in this camera and why it may or may not be the ultimate point and shoot camera. Doug K, welcome to your show.
Thank you, Frederick. Welcome to my show. It's great to be here, but it's really good to have you back on the show. Everyone has missed you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good. It's good to be back on the show. This is, I love All About the Gear because I love gear, even though I can't get all the gear that I want to get. But this is good. But I'll tell you, after our lunch, this camera, and after this review, I'm looking forward to doing this review because depending on how this nets out, I may pull the trigger on getting this camera because this does some stuff that fits into the style of photography I'm moving towards that no other camera can do. So let's start with the basics. What are the basics? Give us the meat and potatoes of this camera.
Okay, so it's the RX100 Mark IV, and we don't have too many version 4 cameras out there, but this is one of them. And it is I guess you could call it a compact. It's almost a point and shoot, but it's probably the ultimate in that compact point and shoot market. So it's the 4th generation, as I said. They've come out with one every year since 2012. This guy is fairly expensive. He's priced at $950 US, putting it pretty far up there. 20 megapixels, new sensor. Check this out. 4K video in this little teeny package. All right.
Yeah.
It actually says 4K video right there. See it?
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things I have on my little check mark.
Yeah. 4K video, and some of the magic is super slow-mo, up to 1,000 frames per second slow motion.
Another checkbox.
Yeah.
Yep.
Real fast shutter, 16 frames a second in terms of continuous still shooting. And some things that are pretty much the same. I'll just give you a quick tour. There's the same 24-70 equivalent lens that we had on the last few cameras. No change to the lens whatsoever. No change to the LCD. It still tips up, all the way into selfie mode.
YouTube vlogger mode.
Yeah, there we go. We got selfie mode. Who is that guy, right?
I don't know.
And of course it tips down as well. So we can go all the way down for shooting up above your head.
Yeah.
It has the same really cool pop-up EVF, right? So here's the electronic viewfinder. You pop it up and then you pull it out. And if you don't remember to pull it out, everything looks out of focus. And of course, it's easy to bump with your eye or your glasses. But one of the new features is it used to be that when you push this down, it automatically turned off the camera. You now have that. That's now optional. So you can push that down or not.
Do you find yourself using that? Because the more and more the LCDs of these cameras improve, the less I find myself pulling the camera up to my face to shoot with the viewfinder.
Yeah, I use it quite a bit, although I have to admit I'm getting more and more used to using the rear of the camera, so not so much anymore. But I do use it, and I think it's clearly something that separates this camera from other things in its class. So It's essentially the same as the Mark III, which came out a year ago, which we also reviewed. We've reviewed the Mark II and the Mark III on All About the Gear.
Yeah.
Essentially the same with improved image quality, better video, a lot of video features. Those are the main differences right there.
No, that 24-70 equivalent lens that's on there, and this is a 1-inch, 20 megapixel 1-inch And you have in the notes here stacked back illuminated sensor. I want to dive into that a little bit. But how fast is the lens?
The lens is pretty good. It's at wide open apertures, it's f1.8. It goes quickly to 2.8. So as you start to zoom in, it goes rapidly down to f2.8, but it stays at 2.8. So, you get an f2.8 lens, which we would consider a pretty fast zoom in the 24 to 70 range.
Yeah, that's crazy. I put in the notes here a note that I want to do this quote that happened just this past Monday, 2 days ago, as we record this, at Trey Radcliffe's Chicago photo walk thing for his, that tour he's doing to promote that bag. Mm-hmm. I went to the after party and Trey did his presentation to the crowd. And one of the first things he was talking about was that camera, the RX100 Mark IV. And he said, quote, "I could use this camera for about 95% of everything I shoot." And this is Trey, Mr. Landscape, HDR, running around the world, doing all this stuff. So I thought about that. I'm like, that's a huge statement, 95%. And then the rest, of course, would be with his A7, R or whatever he's using. So that's pretty big. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I would actually. I could use it for 95% of my stuff too, and I've used it quite a bit. What I do, this is a camera where you can essentially throw it into a pocket. It's sort of maxes out a man's front pocket, but you throw it into the pocket, and you've got a 24 to 70 in your pocket, a fast 24 to 70, and you can use it for interiors. You can use it for exteriors. You can now use it for action because the autofocus is pretty good, very good, I should say. And you can use it for video. So you can cover 95%. Where don't I use it? Well, when I need ultra high quality, I'm turning to my brand new Leica Q. When I need real high ISO, I use my A7S, my super night vision camera. And that's pretty much all I own now. So
you're done. I mean, you're well-rounded unless, Canon or Nikon come out with some groundbreaking body that you absolutely have to have. You're good to go right now, right?
I don't own a high-res landscape type camera. I don't own anything bigger than 24 megapixels. But again, I rarely shoot anything like that, so I'm fine.
You could rent it when you need it from our friends at Borrow Lenses.
At borrowlenses.com, who have supplied the gear for this review. Thank you, Borrow Lenses.
Perfect segue there. Okay, well, cool. So in the notes here, you put in here dual recording. What does that mean?
Yeah, dual recording means it's very limited. But if you're in basic video mode, if you're recording video, you can press the shutter release and also get a still recording. It's only a 16.8 or 17 megapixel image, but it's sort of a nice feature because you can just grab a still.
Is micro four thirds resolution, right?
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly right. So, and it's better than, in the micro four thirds world, we do a lot of shooting 4K video for the purpose of shooting stills, and we end up with an 8 megapixel still. Here you get a 16 megapixel still, and you're not in 4K mode. You're only in 1080 mode. So
yeah, like that picture behind me back there is a frame grab from a 4K clip.
So
it's printed at 16, I think it's a 16 by 20 or something like that.
Yeah, the thing about Sony with this mode, and I hesitate to even put this in the review, this dual recording thing, is this camera, like a lot of Sony gear, has so many features, but some of them are so hard to get to. And I've complained over and over again about the complexity of Sony menus. I can't tell you the number of times that you go to adjust something and it says, you can't change this while you're in that mode. So you're in auto mode and you can't change something. You have to leave auto mode, go to manual mode, make the change. And then when you go back to auto mode, that change is still in effect, but it wouldn't let you change it while you're in auto mode. And it just drives you nuts.
It's like eating crab, right? You got to dig in there to get to the good stuff, right?
It's a low calorie diet because it's so hard to get the food out. So that's just an overall criticism of Sony stuff in general. They throw so many features in there, and they're sometimes so hard to get to.
Speaking of so hard to get to, I know this is probably in the notes, but did you is the screen on there touch screen, the back?
No touch. Sony doesn't do touch.
What is it? It's always like they almost get there. There's like almost get there. It's like. Yeah. a little bit more. Charge me another $12 and throw touch on there, man.
Right. One of the things they've got, if I can do it here, so they have this quick menu like many cameras these days have.
Yeah.
And you've got these little controls where you can go and select things, and it's relatively quick to get to things like ISO.
Yeah.
And what you want to do, though, is you want to just be able to touch things. And, you can do that all day long, but nothing's going to happen,
Right. And we're trained all day long to do that on our phones. And you get another screen that looks like your phone, and you're like, the chimp trying to get it.
So, you have to navigate it with the tilting wheel and all that stuff. Whereas, you have to go click, 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 and then down. You know what it's like? It's like, typing on a remote control that doesn't have a keyboard. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Like putting in your password, they encourage you to use long passwords, and then you have to put in this 18 letter password.
Yeah.
And you have to use the shift key and all that stuff. So
yeah, it's like using the Apple TV remote to get around.
Yeah. Thank you, Apple, for only having one button.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right. Well, let's do some comparisons here.
Okay.
So, like this thing is like almost identical in form factor to the Mark III, correct? So what are the main deltas between that version and this?
Take a look at that. Can't even tell them apart.
They're identical twins.
If I go to pick one up, I can't even tell you which one to pick up unless I look at the top plate and see whether it's the 3 or the 4. So literally the exact same form factor.
Yeah.
Same control, same lens. The controls are actually, I can pick up the proper camera. Oh, I got the wrong one. Sure enough. So the controls on the camera are actually very good considering the size. Forget about the menu problems. But you've got on the top sort of the usual stuff there, power switch, zoom. You can also zoom with the ring. The lens ring can be configured to be your zoom control also, which is really a nice feature. Yeah, cool. But on the back, you have pretty good things. And luckily, they've taken this movie button and moved it out of the way so you don't hit things too much. That's been that way for a couple of versions.
Does the old one have that LCD that pops up and faces forward as well?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's been there for quite a while.
Okay.
The selfie
mode. Yep.
Here we go. Okay. So anyway, controls are pretty good. Yeah. You want to talk about video?
I want to talk about video. Yeah.
All right.
Let's talk about video. And specifically what aspect of video I want to talk about. 2 aspects, 4K and Slo-Mo.
Yeah. Okay. So that's it. It has 4K and Slo-Mo.
That's it. On to the next thing.
Yeah. The 4K is I think the biggest thing because it's something that people will use on a regular basis. Because Sony came out with, I think the Alpha 7S was their first 4K camera in still cameras, but it required an external recorder, and they've quickly now solved the heat problem, and they've got 4K directly to the SD cards. Make sure you get. It's very critical which SD cards you get. You have to use an SDXC UHS 1 or 3 class U3 card. Did you get that?
No.
But go and look at the specs because it's not going to work with every card. It needs to be a really fast card to be able to stream 4K video out to it. Same if you want to stream 1080p video out at the highest bit rate, you need a real fast video card.
Okay.
But it does that. That's the main thing. And it's real nice. It also, of course, has a HDMI output.
With that, and the folks that do pro video watching this are going to say, okay, elaborate on that HDMI output. Is it a clean HDMI out signal?
Yeah, it's clean. So you don't get any of the garbage from the LCD. You get nice, clean output.
Okay, cool. So you could run it into an external HDMI display if you wanted to. But then again, why would you go through all that trouble for a small camera like this, right? Yeah. You want to use something like a GH4 or one of the bigger professional Sony cameras if you're going to do that, right?
Right. So the 4K is pretty straightforward, works great. The slow-mo, the slow motion is something, as you said, at lunch last week or 2 weeks ago, we played with this thing, and it, we did some incredible 960 frames per second slow-mo video.
Yeah.
And then we tried to do it again and we couldn't figure out how.
Yeah.
So, if you think about it, it's a complicated challenge because you're actually only shooting 2 seconds of real-time video is all you can do at that speed. But it's 40x, so you're actually getting, 80 seconds of playback time.
Yeah, and you got to wrap your brain around that. And you're right, getting into that mode, we both tried it, and it's kind of like solving a Rubik's Cube to get to the feature almost every time you want to get in there, because it's so complicated.
I think the problem was that we were able to do it before the martinis, but after the martinis, we couldn't figure it out how.
I think you're onto something here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm not giving anything away about that.
Yeah. But the mode, like getting into that mode, I think one of the things that we experienced during that as well is that it will only play back that slow-mo in the camera, and you have to convert it. Was that true? You were going to investigate that a little bit?
I didn't finish that up. I've only looked at them on the back of the camera, but part of the problem is they use a new codec. It's the XAVCS codec, and I believe, and people are going to write in and tell me I'm wrong, but I believe that there are very few desktop apps out there that can read that codec directly and process it. So it requires the thing to be re-encoded, transcoded into another format before you can edit. I think it's a non-editable format unless it's transcoded to something else. Again, could be mistaken on that, but it's something to look out for.
Okay.
Another thing that's really important about the video, the 4K video, is that they have now S-Log2 Gamma, which is really nice for people who want to do professional quality work. They want to get a nice low contrast image out of the camera so that they have the ability to then go and ramp up the contrast and tweak the color in the ways that they like. So it's very nice for people who want to make sure that the color grading is the same as matching other cameras, things like that.
Got it. So again, one little toe in the water for the professional users out there. It's just crazy how much tech we're packing into these cameras these days, isn't it? It's just like, you think 10 years ago, we wouldn't have dreamed, especially filmmakers would not have dreamed of having a piece of hardware like this that they could throw in their pocket and take to dinner. It's crazy.
It's a computer with a lens. Mm-hmm. And so there's almost no limit to what they're going to be able to do in terms of processing. And as the processing improves, the heat goes down, the battery consumption goes down. This is just a trend that's going to continue. I don't see it slowing down anytime soon.
We'll talk about that a little bit, the battery life, because I know with your other Sonys, they haven't been exactly leading the pack in terms of battery longevity. What's this one like? Yeah,
this one's about 20% worse on battery life than the previous model. I think the last one.
Now they're in the negative then. I mean, how does that?
Well, it's because they got all those goodies in there.
Yeah.
But it did. I think the last one was good for about 300 shots. Again, this is probably not a camera you're going to go out and shoot as many images. Well, I'm not going to say how you'd use it, but maybe the last version was good for about 300 images roughly. This one's down to maybe 250, 230 before the battery dies. But the batteries are cheap and they're small. So I never worry too much about battery life because it's so easy just to stock up on batteries. Gordon Lang, of course, would look for something here, which is it does have the ability, not only does it have the ability to charge through the USB port, but that's the only way you can charge this. It does not ship with a battery charger. So
is that available separately though? Can you buy one?
You can buy a charger. And of course you can buy third-party batteries with chargers. And that's the way most people probably go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that works out great. So, you go out and you get this camera, you can charge the battery in the camera, and then you buy a third-party charger that comes with 2 batteries and you're set.
Yeah. I wish these camera manufacturers would figure out a way to standardize on one battery size, across the line, and then maybe give us cradles or adapters to fit the various body sizes.
That makes perfect sense. My D3S had a battery that was the size of this camera. So
yeah. I mean, I can see, for that kind of thing, these beauty cameras, but the smaller ones standardize on one little size battery, and then we can adapt it with a cradle to go into whatever slot it needs to go into.
Yeah, I think all the RX cameras from Sony have the same size battery. I can't remember the RX1R if it did, and certainly all of the Alpha 7 cameras use the exact same battery. So it's they're hanging on to the battery design, which, as a user who has or may have multiple batteries, you do appreciate that, because the last thing you want to do is go out with 2 cameras that are supposed to be similar but have different batteries. That's annoying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm looking at my shelf. I have a charging shelf that has like 5 different kinds of chargers and batteries and all this stuff, and you have to really think about the night before you're going out on a shoot. You got to really think about what you're doing, because it's got to be right. I'm like, come on, simplify that whole thing, make it easy for us. But I understand that's also a revenue stream, right? So by changing that form factor, yeah, it's different. Anyway,
That's a horrible way to make money.
yeah, I know. All right, let's talk about the body and controls and the differences there. You said the body is identical.
There's no change from the last model. And of course, you don't have a Mark III, so you're not comparing.
No.
But no, it's great. It fits in it's a 24 to 70 equivalent in your pocket, and it'll do 95%. No GPS. Awful Sony menus, as you know. It does have Wi-Fi. It has NFC. It has installable apps, which are annoying because
you have those on your other Sony cameras. Do you find yourself using those? Is there like the time-lapse app in there and things like that?
The only time I use them is for reviews. When I have to review them, then I look at them. The one that I do use, of course, is the remote, where you can control the camera for taking pictures. And of course, you can transfer them to a mobile device during playback.
Yeah,
that's the one app that I'm going to use. But they have good remote apps. They have, like I say, the time lapse. They've got a couple of others. It's a nice idea, but again, it's a Sony implementation. So you've got, the whole thing's really awkward. It's.
I wonder why. I mean,
what it's like.
They have a good amount of cash. I'm sure throw some of it in hire a UI designer, steal one from Apple or somebody.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of? It's as though they went to Adobe and said, "Give us something that's as easy to use as Creative Cloud." They didn't go to Apple and say, "Give us something that's as easy as the App Store." They said, "Oh, let's do something like Creative Cloud." It's not technically like that, but in terms of usability and bugginess, that's what it reminds me of.
That's when you put engineers on UI design. That's what happens.
I mean, the last thing I want to do is be out in the field wanting to update an app and have to remember a password.
Right.
I mean, that's just annoying,
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Put the people, you gotta actually use your hardware. So
right.
To send someone out on a mission for a week with the camera and have them suffer through the menus trying to get shots, they'll come back with some ideas on how to refine that, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
Eat your own dog food. That's what we used
exactly. And you said this thing has a built-in ND filter as well, right?
Yeah, they've had that for a couple of versions. So first of all, this camera now in electronic shutter mode goes up to 32,000th of a second,
wow,
which is great for those of us who like to shoot wide open outdoors, or people who are shooting video where you're only shooting at 24, 25 frames a second, and you have real slow shutter speeds. Of course, that's not. I'm going down the wrong path with that discussion because I'm mixing video and still, but if you want to shoot at wide open apertures in still photography, then you need that fast shutter or the ND filter. This one has both.
Right. Yeah. Well, the bottom line is it gives you more control, up to 3 EV over the light that's coming into the camera. So you have another lever to pull to get the shot for the situation that you're in.
Yeah. And an interesting thing about the camera is, a lot of cameras talk about the fact that they have so-called digital zoom, right? Digital zoom is just cropping. Yeah. This camera does pretty well. I mean, you can certainly take it by 2x. So you could basically get the equivalent of a 10 megapixel image by cropping this thing 50%. And it works very well. I think cameras nowadays are good enough and sharp enough that we can start to venture into the digital zoom area. Of course, all of us who use smartphones are used to digital zoom because that's all we've got.
Yeah.
But it works well. The in-body image stabilization is excellent. The whole system, the lens and sensor combined, are very sharp. It's got a good macro mode, always has. So it's a very, very worthy camera.
Okay, let's talk about that shutter and the sensor. And specifically, you mentioned that stacked sensor design. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so they used to have just a regular old CMOS sensor, right? And then they came out with this back illuminated, again, a horrible name for these things. What they basically did is took the electronics that were on the front of the sensor, blocking some of the light, moved them to the back side of the sensor so that your electronics and connections don't block light. Therefore, you get more light on those little pixels and you have better ISO and noise performance.
Sure.
Now what they've done is they've put another layer on the back of the sensor that has more processing. The processing used to be physically on the edge of the chip. It used to be around the edges. They've now put the electronics on the back of the chip, which means they can read the sensor much more quickly. And because they can read the sensor more quickly, that gives them higher frame rates, easier 4K video, and the Slo-Mo. And then what they've also done in this case, which is fairly unusual, is they've added RAM to the sensor itself as a buffer. So
Nice.
this is some impressive chip, right?
Wow.
This thing actually has processing and RAM all as part of the back of the sensor. And
but what does that give you? I mean, it sounds great though. Hey, my sensor has RAM on it. But what in practice, what does that give me? Lower latency?
Yeah, what the main thing is, it means, again, they can read the sensor super fast.
Okay.
And one place you're really going to notice it is this camera has almost no rolling shutter. Rolling shutter is a problem that you see when you pan horizontally and shoot. And what happens is, if you're in electronic shutter, if the shutter is reading the sensor during the exposure time and it's going vertically, what happens is things that should be vertical are actually slanted.
Right.
And you see this a lot in video. This camera has
like it's ripping a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. This camera has virtually no rolling shutter. And part of that is because it can read the sensor so fast.
Wow. All right. What else?
Okay. Those are the big things. Of course, we said one of the nice features is 16 frames a second this little thing will shoot. It'll shoot 5 frames a second in continuous autofocus. That is refocusing in between each frame, 5 frames a second, which for a camera in this class is very impressive. Yeah. 16 means it's just going to it's going to focus for the first frame, and then it's going to leave that focus for the rest.
Yeah.
Flash, the fill flash. Again, you don't use the flash on this as real flash, but it's a nice little flash for fill flash. Mm-hmm. And you can sync up to an 800th of a second, which is a nice feature. Mm-hmm. Because when you go up to an 800th of a second, of course, that means you can bring your daylight down. The normal is 200 or 250th of a second.
Again, giving you more control over that light, which is what photography is all about, right?
Yeah. Another feature that I use a lot is auto ISO, where you let the camera pick the ISO. And the problem has always been you often want to set a minimum shutter speed with that. So, for example, you want to make sure that it doesn't go too slow on shutter speed, and it uses ISO instead. Mm-hmm. So in this case, you can not only set the auto ISO to a particular minimum, but you can say vary it with the lens, so with the focal length of the lens, but also you can say make it more conservative, or less conservative. Yeah. So you can really sort of program the auto ISO to be much more intelligent about how it selects the ratio of ISO to shutter speed. Really a nice feature.
Yeah, I love that. And I got to tell you, you and I both, coming from the film world, auto ISO is still a little bit of like unicorn magic for me, because it's like, because you remember carrying different ISO speeds of film in your bag, and now, it's auto. This is going to pick the right one. That I understand the technology, but it's just cool.
Once I decide I'm going to push this one stop to ISO 800, that's ISO 800 for 36 exposures. There's nothing I can do about it, right? And the idea of being able to change that in the middle of a roll is sort of a wild idea. So I'll get used to that.
Yeah. Cool.
I was holding up a roll of film for those who are listening to the audio.
Yeah.
A very important thing also, of course, is that it has an all electronic shutter that makes no noise at all. So you can be out there shooting very quietly. The zoom makes a little noise. So for video, you're going to hear the zoom a little bit. That's an issue.
So how's the dynamic range of this guy?
Dynamic range is not great. I mean, that's that's part of the price you pay for having this small sensor and 20 megapixels. Mm-hmm. That's where you're going to see the difference. Trey Ratcliffe is going to see the difference between this and his big Sony, or what he used to shoot with a D810. You're not going to get the dynamic range. You got good ISO sensitivity, but the range between your darkest and lightest things is not going to be as great as it's going to be with a larger sensor.
Got it. Sounds, so far, we're almost through this review, but so far it sounds like it's a highly capable camera with a few little, what's up with that's in there. So,
but wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. Go on. What else?
All right. So the EVF has been improved. More dots, brighter. It's great EVF. Again, you may or may not use it.
Mm-hmm.
Autofocus, much better than the 3. The 3 was already pretty good, but they've got face detection autofocus, and Sony has a lot of people have this now, but marvelous face recognition, both for anonymous faces, and you can also register specific faces. And
it's like an NSA mode.
What's that?
It's like NSA mode on there, right?
Yeah, we don't want to go there, but yes, exactly. And but it's a very good way to shoot, because the problem with autofocus is often that it focuses on the thing that's closest to the camera, and often there's something in a foreground, but what you really want is the person. So that forces you to go to a spot focus or even a manual focus. If you're using face detection and it sees a face, the face gets priority over what's ever closest to the camera. Brilliant. And it works very well. And we have that on most of our mirrorless cameras now. But autofocus continuous is really the standout, and that is put this thing into your 5 frames per second continuous shooting mode, have somebody run right at you, and every shot's going to be in focus, which is very impressive.
On this camera, AFC should stand for, instead of continuous, it should stand for autofocus on children mode.
There you go.
Yeah. Those are the gnats that are flying around, and you want to track them as they bounce around with their sugar high, right?
Yeah, I wonder if there's a mother-in-law filter for the focus. Right? So, focus on faces, but not my mother-in-law. Right?
That would be reverse face recognition, because it would detect that particular face and then blur it. Right? Yeah, your mother-in-law is watching this, Doug.
Oh gosh, I hope not. She's been dead for 40 years.
You never know. You never know.
Oh, Virginia.
You're going to start seeing books falling over in the background. All right. On with the show before we get Doug in trouble with the poltergeists.
On that note, I think we've covered all the features of the camera. Just to finish the video, built-in stereo mics, no external mics on this, no headphone jack. But again, it's a teeny little camera, so I'm not surprised.
I wouldn't expect that. I mean, I've given up on that. Having headphone jacks on these smaller cameras, I think they're just not going to do it. Period. Personally, when I see a camera manufacturer add 4K and put that emphasis on video, the other half of the video equation is audio. So giving us this superb, beautiful 4K video and expecting the audio that goes with it to be recorded with the onboard mics is kind of insane to me. So, we'll see where that goes.
What this is great for in the video world is if you're going to take something like your, GH4 out to shoot 4K video, and you want to shoot a second angle.
Oh yeah, a B-roll camera, yeah.
Just to shoot, you shoot the wide shot with that. You set this up for a close-up or an over-the-shoulder shot, and you've got it. And then you use the audio to sync the 2 tracks with pluralize, and you're all set. And it's really, it's just perfect for that.
Yeah. Or Premiere or Final Cut actually does the syncing internally now.
There you go.
Yep. Cool. All right. What about the wireless connectivity of this thing?
Yeah, we mentioned that Wi-Fi. Yes, NFC, yes, no GPS. People are getting away from GPS in the cameras. It doesn't bother me. I'm happy to use a GPS tracker in my phone and sync them up later.
For the one time a year that you'd use it, right?
Yeah. And if I ever go back to Iceland, then I'll miss the GPS. But Iceland's too cold. I'm not going back to. Let Martin go to Iceland.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the who's in the ring with this competition wise.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges doing these reviews. The big challenger is the previous version of this exact same camera, the RX100 Mark III. That camera is still expensive at $800. Remember, this is $950 in the US. So for $150 less, you can get a Mark III. And I'll bet you can buy a good used Mark III probably for $150 less than that. 10 frames a second instead of 16, no 4K video, but an excellent camera. I own the Mark III. I will not likely upgrade because I don't need the video improvement. Everything else that the Mark III does is just fine for me. But that's something to consider. Remember, these RX100s are the very top end of cameras you can put in your pocket.
Sure.
You can't do better than these.
It's the professional's point and shoot camera.
It's a pro camera, but it's also one I love traveling with this camera and something larger, giving this to my wife or someone I'm traveling with and say, use this as a point and shoot. Mm-hmm. And then if I need it for some reason, I'll say, hey, can I borrow your camera?
Perfect. Would you consider taking this camera? You go to Hawaii relatively often, as indicated by the shirt that you're wearing. But would you consider taking this camera as your exclusive primary camera to Hawaii?
Yeah, because I don't shoot much in Hawaii.
Okay.
So yes, I would. But this always goes with me. I go to Cuba a few times a year with a workshop that I lead, and this camera always goes with me. If I go out to dinner, I like to have my hands free. I don't want to carry a bag. So I'll throw this into my pocket, and this does a great job of shooting shots around the dinner table. Great camera to shoot at night. I've rarely been out with just this camera wishing I had something fancier. So it's that Trey Ratcliffe 95% thing.
It's 95% there. Yeah. Except for those few little caveats.
Yeah, and they're minor. They're minor.
Yeah, I agree. They're minor for such a highly capable camera, to throw in your camera bag. If you can pull the trigger on $950 or $1,000+ after tax, then it makes a whole lot of sense to get this thing. And it seems like if you bought this, much like your RX100 Mark III, you're going to keep it for a while. This is going to be one of those cameras that's bulletproof. Sony makes good stuff. You're not going to be, regretting it next year when they come out with the Mark V, probably.
Yeah, I think we all tend to have our serious camera, and we're sort of hanging on the edge of our seats waiting for the new versions of those to come out, and we upgrade them frequently. But just like you said, with these secondary cameras, they can stay on our shelves and be used for years, and we don't have to have necessarily the latest and greatest of our backup cameras, of our second cameras.
Yep, love it. Hey, a bit of news we had in the notes here.
Well, we got one more camera I want people to think about, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gordon and I did a review of the Canon G7X. Forget the fact that there's probably a GX7 from Lumix, but the G7X is quite a bit less. It's only $650, $300 less than this. It's the same size body. So again, it's pocketable. 20 megapixels. It's got a slightly longer lens. It's a 4x zoom instead of a 2x zoom. It's 24 to 200. So more than 4 times. Has no electronic viewfinder, no 4K. It has tilt and touch screen. Not that that's the biggest thing, but you should look at the Canon G7X if you're looking at cameras in this category. I would still buy a Sony RX100 Mark III before I buy the Canon, but I would seriously look at that Canon camera too. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, 20 megapixels, 24 to 200. Where do you fall on those super zooms, Doug, by the way? Do you?
Well, we reviewed some of them. The super zooms are amazing. They can give you 30 times zoom range in optical, and if you crop, you can go to a 60x. We did a show about them. Gordon and I did. They're very great if you need to have a travel camera with a very long lens, but the image quality is always going to be poor. And if you put this side by side, and I have one of the Canon super zooms here, highly regarded camera, very inexpensive, $400 or so, but the image quality really does suffer, and you see it quite clearly.
Interesting. All right, what's the last closing news we had here? You had in the notes.
Well, just something that has been kicking around here: the fact that Sony has decided to shut down their U.S. online store.
Wow.
And that doesn't affect the gear at all, but it's an interesting note. What they've decided to do, they're being very upfront about it. They want to support their resellers. They don't want to compete with the resellers. And so they've decided to let the resellers have all the retail business that's in the U.S.
Interesting. I wonder, and I have no visibility into this, obviously, but I wonder what they're doing with their retail stores. Those Sony mall stores that they have around. Seems like they would It seems like they would have shuttered those before they shuttered the online store.
Yeah, that's interesting. And now, there's one in San Francisco at the Metro, and I haven't been there recently to know if they're still even there or they're still selling gear. Have you been there?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I don't know, but maybe it's more of a showcase than it is an actual retail store. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well,
and,
cool.
You can always, you can always save $1 by going to Amazon or B&H or somewhere like that. For some reason, it's $1 or a penny cheaper than the Sony list price.
Of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah. And with Prime, it makes it make a whole lot of sense, right? So maybe that's the strategy. They're still moving, product through Amazon. Why not just use them and let them absorb all those online costs and headaches and all that? So,
exactly.
What's coming up next?
Well, I think one of we're doing these shows in a strange order, so we're not completely sure. But one camera we know we're going to do after this is one you've got, the DX01.
Yes,
which is an odd little device, but I'm very much looking forward to hearing about that.
Yeah, I've been carrying that around. In fact, I just got back from a trip, and the DX01 kind of saved the day. I'll reveal it in when we do the review, but it kind of saved the day for one event I went to. But for those that don't know, the DX01 is from a company called DxO, who is famous for doing their benchmarking of cameras and lenses and that sort of thing. But this is their first piece of hardware, and what it is a little camera, a viewfinder free camera or a display free camera that plugs into your iPhone through the port on your iPhone and gives you that high speed connection between the phone and the camera. It's a 20 megapixel camera, fixed, no zoom, fixed lens, and it's pretty cool. It does a couple of cool things, but there are a couple of caveats, and I always bring those up. There's a couple of gotchas in there that I'm sure will get ironed out. This is the first version, but for a first effort, this is a superb camera with just a couple of caveats that I'll point out in the review.
I'm looking forward to that because you and I are going to switch roles. I am really looking forward to putting you on the hot seat.
Bring it.
And asking some of the head scratching questions about that one.
Yeah. There's a couple ones. There's a couple in there, and I've had it for several weeks now. I've played with it. I've shot a ton with it. I have some good opinions on it. I'm not going to reveal if you should buy it or not. You have to wait for the review to see that. But I think you'll learn a lot about the DX01 during that review.
Hey, before we go, have I sold you on the Mark IV?
Good question. Well, you kind of lost me at that $1,000 price point. So I got to look a little deeper. Like I would have, if it wasn't $1,000, I was actually thinking somewhere around 700, 800, 1,000, maybe. I'm going to look at it and look at some of the videos and some of the slow-mos that it produces. If I can't resist after that, then I'll start trying to move pennies around if I can see if I can't pull it.
Frederick, think of it as an investment.
That's what they always say. Yeah. As if, no, there's no way this could possibly be an investment for me. This is an impulse, not needed, first world decadent problem. So yeah, I'm looking at it. It looks like a great camera. I just got to justify if I need it to add it to the few cameras that I already have. But I'm sure a lot of people that are watching and listening to this have the same issue. Looks great, looks awesome. I love all that stuff. But, can I use that $1,000 for something else to augment the gear that I already have? Or do I absolutely need this point and shoot camera? So who knows? We'll see.
There you go. All
right, Doug. Well, that's it. That's it for another episode of All About the Gear. You can check out this show and the rest of the gear shows at thisweekinphoto.com/gear and see all the ones that Doug and I recorded and that Doug and Gordon recorded. I think, Doug, how many are we up to right now? How many shows?
We're just at about 50 shows.
50 shows. So there are 50 different cameras up there.
2 years plus we've been doing it.
Wow. All right. Thanks a lot, Doug, and we'll see you in the next one.